Hey there, survivors. Thanks for tuning into this story. If you're new here, please consider subscribing. It really helps me keep these stories coming. And while you're here, let me know in the comments where you're listening from. Now let's get started. I used to wear a badge, not that it means much anymore. Everything changed the day our city fell under the weight of the zombie outbreak. One moment, I was a respected officer tasked with maintaining order. The next, I was just another survivor scrambling to stay one step ahead of the infected. I didn't notice it at first, how quickly the situation spiraled. But once the emergency alert hit our phones, radio stations, and even the loudspeakers downtown, it was already too late. I remember the blaring sirens. Emergency alert, zombie outbreak detected, seek immediate shelter. We had practiced for scenarios, riots, chemical leaks, fires, but never anything like this. My training was all about crowd control and legal procedure, not how to handle a swarm of the living dead. The first few hours were absolute chaos. People were boarding up windows and doors while the infected roamed the streets. It was surreal watching my fellow officers and friends turn into the very creatures we were meant to stop. My unit was split up in the chaos. Communication lines crackled with half sentences and panic. Dispatch operators tried to keep everyone coordinated, but the waves of emergency alerts only seemed to spread confusion. Each time an alarm blared, you could see fresh waves of terror on people's faces. I managed to find a few survivors by the time night fell. A paramedic named Kayla, a security guard from a local mall named Jonas, and two teenagers who had lost their parents in the chaos. They were huddled near a convenience store when I found them. We were all scanning the surroundings, flinching at every distant noise. The city looked like it had gone on lockdown in a matter of hours. Shutters pulled down, vehicles abandoned at odd angles, and flickering streetlights that occasionally illuminated a figure lurking in the distance. We knew we couldn't stay outside for long, but we had nowhere safe to go. That's when Kayla mentioned a rumor. She had overheard it on her ambulance radio while trying to coordinate medical assistance for the infected. Someone had found a hidden bunker beneath an old fire station on the outskirts of town. The place was decommissioned years ago, but apparently it still had a sturdy basement once designed for civil emergencies. If the bomb rumors were true, if the military was considering a last resort measure to contain the zombie virus, then we needed to find shelter underground, fast. By the next morning, the city-wide emergency alert, zombie outbreak, evacuate the city immediately broadcasts were unstoppable. Everything beeped and glowed with warnings. Cell phones, billboards, radio frequencies. The city was soon labeled a quarantine zone. Words like containment and martial law were thrown around on emergency channels. My mind swirled with the duties I once held as a police officer. It felt impossible to live up to the oath I had taken under these conditions. Yet I tried to keep the group calm as best I could. We set out in a battered police cruiser that still had some fuel in the tank, driving with headlights off to avoid drawing attention. The roads were littered with abandoned vehicles, making navigation a nightmare. Every so often, a shuffling figure would cross our path, head cocked in a disquieting angle, eyes glazed over. We did our best to swerve around them while staying quiet. Even the slightest noise seemed to attract the zombies like moths to a flame. It took hours to reach the old fire station. The structure was barely standing, its red paint peeling, windows shattered, and the front doors boarded shut. The sign above was faded and worn, half covered in vines. Inside, the place smelled of stale smoke and dust, with footprints and drag marks on the floor. It was clear we weren't the first to come looking for refuge. Jonas and I searched for the rumored bunker entrance while Kayla and the teenagers kept watch near the main hall. We moved slowly, guided by the weak beam of a flashlight. Every door we opened was a gamble. Behind it could be safety, a group of survivors, or a cluster of infected. Down a dark hallway, in a cramped office with broken chairs and old filing cabinets, I spotted a hatch in the corner. It was partly hidden beneath a rotten floorboard and marked only by a tarnished metal handle. We pried it open carefully and revealed a steep set of concrete stairs leading into darkness. I shouted to the others that we had found the basement. My voice echoed in the empty corridors of the station. Kayla hurried over, the teens in tow. Everyone hesitated at the top of the hatch, looking down into the blackness below. The stale air smelled of damp stone, and the faint clang of metal echoed from some unseen corner. Jonas flicked his flashlight down the passage, revealing a tunnel of blank concrete walls. We decided we had no choice but to descend. Outside, we kept hearing faint moans and shuffling footsteps from the infected. The emergency alert warnings echoed in my mind. Zombie outbreak, evacuate the city immediately. This bunker was our best chance, and we all knew it. At the base of the stairs, we found a rusted metal door with chipped paint. A sign read, "Restricted authorized personnel only." My heart pounded as we pried it open. The old hinges squealed in protest, but it finally gave way. Inside, we discovered a narrow corridor lined with cots, storage shelves, and emergency supplies that must have been stocked decades ago. A single light flickered overhead, powered by some hidden backup generator. Cracks in the walls showed the bunker's age, but it felt solid enough to withstand whatever was happening above ground. Shelves were lined with dusty cans of food, bottled water, and basic medical gear. All told, it was a grim but welcome sight. We blocked the door behind us and set up a makeshift barricade, hoping to keep ourselves safe from zombies or anything else trying to get in. The bunker had several offshoot rooms, small bunk spaces, a rickety restroom, and a storage area filled with old civil defense gear. Most of it looked outdated, but it was better than being outside. We took inventory of supplies, rationed out the food, and tried to settle in. For the first time since the outbreak began, I felt a shred of cautious optimism. That night, the group huddled around an old lantern, eating what little we had. The kids were curled up, trying to rest. Kayla was flipping through her medical bag, counting bandages and gauze. Jonas sat across from me, fiddling with the broken radio, trying to pick up any signal from the outside world. Static was all we heard. Eventually, Jonas's voice broke the silence. "Think we'll get out of here?" he asked. His eyes were ringed with fatigue, and his shirt was stained with dust and sweat. None of us answered at first. I glanced at Kayla. She shook her head in silent uncertainty. The teenagers offered no response either. No one wanted to voice the fear we all shared. Maybe we were sealed in this tomb for good. Before we could dwell on our thoughts, we heard a faint tapping on the metal door we had blocked. A chill spread through me. We clicked off the lantern and listened intently. The tapping continued, irregular, soft but undeniably there. For a long, breathless moment we stayed quiet, hearts pounding. Eventually the tapping stopped, replaced by a distant scraping sound. Then silence. Hours stretched into days in that bunker, each moment weighed down by the knowledge of the zombie outbreak above ground. Now and then, we would hear distant rumbles that felt like thunder or heavy machinery. Maybe the authorities were mobilizing, or perhaps bombs were falling in other parts of the city. The old radio occasionally buzzed with fragmented alerts. Emergency alert, public safety at risk, infected, quarantine. But we never heard a direct rescue call, nor any mention of a safe zone. Tensions rose among us, stuck in close quarters, with fear swirling constantly. Every little noise or suspicion could spark an argument. We tried to assign tasks, collect water from the condensation pipes, catalogue food, keep watch at the door. But the dread of the undead lurking above weighed heavily on our minds. One evening, Kayla pulled me aside. She was worried about Jonas. He had been coughing periodically, and she noticed his hands shaking more than usual. At first, she assumed it was stress, but her medical instincts told her something else might be going on. Could he be getting sick? Was it just exhaustion? Could it be a sign of infection? I recalled the training sessions we had had at the station, the ones that touched on advanced disease protocols. They never once mentioned zombies, of course, but they did emphasize that once someone was infected, it was almost impossible to save them. There were so many unknowns about this particular zombie virus, So many unanswered questions. The emergency alert bulletins had all been vague. Avoid contact with the infected, seek immediate treatment if scratched or bitten. But Jonas had no visible wounds. Could the virus spread some other way? I tried to watch Jonas discreetly. He continued to help with daily tasks, rummaging for supplies, blocking cracks in the bunker walls where rats or insects might crawl in. The more I observed him, the more I doubted Kayla's concerns. He seemed worn down but still functional. My anxiety eased a bit, and I told Kayla that maybe he was just exhausted. A day later, however, something shifted. We were all awakened in the middle of the night by the metal door rattling violently. This wasn't a mere tapping, it was a forceful, frantic pounding. The entire bunker seemed to vibrate with it, sending dust spiraling down from the ceiling. Jonas clutched his head, wincing, mumbling about pain behind his eyes. Kayla rushed to his side, shining a flashlight on his face. He looked pale, sweat beading on his forehead. The teenagers started to cry out of fear, their voices echoing in the cramped corridor. I grabbed a metal pipe to use as a makeshift weapon and approached the door, heart hammering. Whatever was on the other side finally ceased its assault. In the sudden silence, I could hear my own pulse in my ears. I tried to steady my breathing, pressing my ear to the cold metal. Nothing but the faint scrape of movement beyond it. Jonas's cough worsened that night, and he mumbled incoherently in his sleep. Kayla stayed by his side, doing what she could with the limited medical supplies, but her eyes were filled with worry. She didn't dare voice her suspicion in front of the teenagers. 2 days of tense quiet followed. The pounding on the door didn't return, but every night we heard sporadic scratching, low moans, and the occasional shuffle that made our skin crawl. We took turns sleeping, one person always staying awake to keep watch. Sometimes in the gloom of the bunker, I could almost convince myself that the zombie outbreak above ground was a nightmare. But all it took was a single scraping noise against the door to yank me back to reality. Jonas's conditions seemed to improve slightly after Kayla adjusted his sleeping arrangements and made him drink more fluids. We dared to hope that maybe he just had a fever that wasn't related to the infected. But a subtle tension lingered among us. The teenagers kept their distance, whispering to each other whenever Jonas cleared his throat or took a labored breath. We were caught in a loop. Ration food, check for structural weaknesses, wait for rescue, or a sign that the zombie outbreak had been contained. But the rescue never came. We feared the worst, that the city outside had been overrun completely by zombies. Word had spread that a bomb might be dropped to contain the situation, yet we had no confirmation. The bunker's thick walls shielded us from outside noise, leaving us in a vacuum of half-knowledge. Eventually, cabin fever started to grip us. We argued about the best course of action. Kayla insisted we try to retrieve the radio from upstairs to see if we could send out an SOS. One of the teenagers wanted to attempt an escape, citing how we were running low on fresh water. Jonas, though silent, seemed to be regaining his energy. He offered little input, but I caught him staring at the bunker door for long stretches, as if drawn by something he couldn't explain. One morning I woke up to find Jonas gone. His sleeping bag was crumpled, and the old flashlight I had left near him lay rolling on the concrete floor. Alarmed, I roused Kayla. We found the teenagers asleep in the corner, but Jonas was nowhere in sight. Our barricade at the door had been nudged aside. Did he go outside? I felt a pang of dread as I recalled Kayla's earlier concerns about him possibly being infected. Without wasting time, Kayla and I grabbed our meager weapons, a metal pipe for me, a small fire axe for her, and we decided to search the fire station above. We told the teenagers to stay put, lock the door behind us, and open it only when they heard our distinct knock pattern. Upstairs, the fire station was exactly as we had left it, dimly lit by narrow beams of early morning light poking through boarded-up windows. Broken furniture was scattered about. The smell of rot and dampness permeated the air. We tread carefully, mindful that any sudden noise might attract zombies or something else. Our footsteps echoed down the corridor. We whispered Jonas's name, but all we heard was our own breathing. We passed the old garage where the fire engine used to be kept, now filled with dusty hoses and a battered ambulance that looked like it hadn't moved in years. No sign of Jonas. Finally, we approached the station's main entrance. The boards we had used to seal the doors were partly broken, as though someone had pushed or pried them from the inside. Kayla's grip on the axe tightened. As we drew closer, we noticed footprints on the dusty floor. They led out onto the street. I peeked through a gap in the boards. The morning light revealed an empty road choked with abandoned cars. A few silhouettes shambled in the distance. Zombies, aimlessly roaming. The footprints ended just outside. There was no sign of Jonas, no clue where he might have gone. Kayla's face paled. We both knew the danger of being exposed for too long. Cautiously, we returned to the bunker, dread gnawing at us the entire time. Could Jonas have been infected after all, drawn by some uncanny urge to walk among the undead? Or was he searching for something else? Answers, rescue, a possible cure? Whatever his reasons, we had no way of finding him safely in a city filled with infected. The best we could do was retreat. As the days wore on, Jonas did not return. The bunker grew colder, and our hopes for rescue dwindled. We heard more frequent thudding and scratching at the metal door, as if something, or someone, was determined to get inside. Kayla tried to keep morale up, reminding us that old bunkers like this often had thick walls designed for emergency situations, but none of us could ignore the reality. We were trapped. The teenagers spent their hours playing cards with a worn deck they had found in the storage room. Their voices sometimes echoed with forced cheer, a pitiful attempt to maintain a semblance of normality. Meanwhile, Kayla and I busied ourselves taking stock of supplies. It wasn't long before we realized we were running critically low. If the bomb was going to drop, if it hadn't already, we needed to consider whether we could outlast whatever was happening above. It was during one of these silent inventory checks that we heard the faint groan of metal from the far corner of the bunker. At first, I thought it was the water pipes, but Kayla and I quickly realized it was coming from the old access corridor near the generator room, a part of the bunker we had never fully explored. We exchanged uneasy glances, and I picked up my flashlight. The teenagers were startled by our alarmed faces, so we signaled for them to remain where they were. The corridor near the generator room was a tight space filled with wires, old fuse boxes, and rusted piping. A low hum resonated from the generator that still miraculously powered our lone light bulb. Kayla and I moved cautiously, scanning every corner. The groan of metal came again, and this time it sounded like something was scraping along the wall or the floor. We turned another corner and came upon a small hatch in the ceiling, partially rusted open. A metal ladder led up to darkness. My heart pounded. It hadn't been visible before because it was recessed into the concrete. The scraping sound grew louder. Something was up there, shifting against the metal edges. With a trembling hand, I aimed the flashlight into the opening. All I could see was darkness, but the sense of dread was overwhelming. Every worst-case scenario flashed through my mind. More infected lurking above, or perhaps Jonas had found another way back in. Kayla gripped the axe, bracing herself. Slowly we climbed the ladder. The metal rungs creaked under our weight. I strained my eyes, trying to see where the hatch led. At the top there was a small chamber with a rusted door that appeared to open onto the street. A gust of stale air blew in, carrying a faint, unpleasant odor. Even more unsettling was the realization that the door was slightly ajar. Someone, or something, had forced it open from the outside. Kayla motioned for me to hold the flashlight steady while she inched the door open. We peered out into a narrow alleyway blocked by fallen debris. This part of the fire station had apparently collapsed over time, leaving a hidden entrance that was almost impossible to see from the outside. We might have used it for an escape route, if the city wasn't still infested with zombies. As we prepared to climb down, satisfied that nothing was immediately outside, a sudden clang echoed in the chamber. Kayla slipped, and I lunged to catch her. That's when we heard it, a low, guttural wheeze that reverberated off the concrete walls. The sound was painfully familiar, We froze, hearts hammering. A shape loomed in the darkness of the chamber, hunched and vaguely human. The weak beam of the flashlight revealed tattered clothing and a pair of eyes that caught the light with a dull sheen. It stumbled forward, and in that moment, I saw a badge pinned to its chest, a badge like mine. My throat went dry. The figure reached out with an unsteady arm, revealing an emaciated face and cracked lips. It was Jonas, his expression twisted between recognition and something else, something primal. Kayla gasped, nearly dropping the axe. Jonas's breath rattled and he tried to speak, but only a rasp came out. I noticed dried blood on his uniform sleeve and realized the heartbreaking truth. Jonas was infected. For a moment, none of us moved. Jonas seemed conflicted, as if part of him was fighting to remain human. The emergency alerts had warned us about this, how the infected sometimes retained fleeting memories or emotions before fully succumbing. Then his face contorted with a ravenous hunger. He lurched forward, snapping at the air. Kayla raised the axe defensively, tears forming in her eyes. My flashlight shook in my grip. We couldn't let him wander free inside the bunker, not with the teenagers and limited supplies. But this was Jonas, our friend, who had helped us survive this far. My mind raced, remembering the oath I'd taken as a police officer, the promise to protect. Yet what could I do to protect Jonas from a fate that was already sealed? Jonas managed a guttural growl, his eyes rolling back. He lunged again, forcing Kayla to sidestep. I yelled for her to move away, stepping between them with the flashlight. Another lunge. I had no real weapon, just a metal pipe strapped to my belt. In that split second, Jonas's infected eyes locked with mine, and a flicker of recognition passed across his face. Then, just as quickly, it was gone, replaced by the mindless stare of a zombie. I don't want to detail what happened next. I'd rather not relive it. Let's just say Kayla and I made a choice, one we still question to this day. We couldn't risk Jonas attacking the teenagers, or drawing more of the infected into the bunker. We were trapped in that small chamber, forced to do something no one ever wants to do. The memory of that moment lingers like a permanent shadow on my conscience. Afterward, silence cloaked the bunker. Kayla was trembling, and I felt a numbness creep through my entire body. We climbed back down, sealed the hatch behind us as best we could, and returned to the main area. The teenagers looked at us expectantly, but we offered only brief reassurance. We didn't share the details of what happened. The next few days passed in a blur. The tapping and scraping at the main door grew less frequent, but every noise made me flinch. At times I thought I heard Jonas's voice calling from somewhere deep in the bunker, a faint echo in the corridors. Or maybe it was just my guilt manifesting into echoes. Shortly after, we heard a thunderous roar from above, one that shook the bunker so violently, pieces of the ceiling crumbled. A rumble followed that felt like an earthquake. Perhaps the rumors had been true, a massive strike to sterilize the city of the infected. The walls held, but dust and debris showered us for hours. By the time it subsided, everything was eerily quiet. The emergency alerts we occasionally heard on the radio went silent, replaced by static. In that stillness, we realized our generator was dying. The fuel supply must have been damaged by the tremors. Lights flickered ominously, and the musty air grew suffocating. Each of us knew what the failing generator meant. We had two paths: stay locked inside an increasingly hostile environment, or attempt to venture out into a landscape possibly swarming with the undead, or devastated by that massive strike. Kayla and I argued in whispers, trying not to alarm the teenagers. They deserved a chance at a better life, but we had no guarantee anything was better above ground. The city might be in ruins. The zombies could still be roaming if the bombing wasn't complete. We had no intel, no working radio, no resources to contact anyone. Yet staying in the bunker felt like a slow descent into darkness. The night before we intended to make a decision, I heard a faint clank echo along the bunker corridor, a sound reminiscent of the time Jonas slipped away. My flashlight beams revealed only empty halls, but my nerves were on edge. I felt compelled to check every corner, to ensure no one else had disappeared or snuck in. Kayla followed me with the axe, though her hands trembled with exhaustion. We made our rounds, verifying each door. Everything was secure, but that faint clank persisted, like something gently tapping on metal. It drew us toward the back of the bunker, near the old hatch in the ceiling. When we arrived, we found it sealed, just as we'd left it. The tapping sound was gone. An oppressive silence pressed in around us. That was when Kayla and I realized the door to the storage room was ajar. Inside, the flicker of the failing light revealed footprints in the dust, footprints that weren't ours. My stomach lurched. I recalled the way Jonas had slipped out unnoticed. Who else was in here with us? Or was one of the teenagers sneaking around? We stepped in carefully. Shelves lined the walls with ancient supplies. In the corner was a ragged cot, once used by someone else who sought refuge here. The footprints circled the cot and then ended at the wall. Kayla lifted the lantern and we saw it. Fresh scratches on the concrete, arranged in a pattern we couldn't decipher. Next to them lay a single item, a badge. Jonas's badge. The same one I had seen pinned to his uniform in that horrifying moment. A chill passed through me. I picked up the badge, turning it over in my hand. My name was on it. Not Jonas's, not anyone else's. It was my old police badge, battered and scuffed. I had lost it when the outbreak started, or so I thought. How had it ended up here, in the darkest recess of the bunker? Kayla and I exchanged horrified looks. Neither of us had an answer. The realization dawned that perhaps Jonas's infection was only one piece of this nightmare. Could there be others down here with us? Other survivors or infected who found access through hidden passages? Or was the bunker itself playing tricks on our minds, amplifying our guilt and fear until we couldn't distinguish reality from imagination? We retreated to the main corridor, shaken, and vowed to stay together until morning. The teenagers were asleep, unaware of our discovery. The night dragged on in tense silence. Every drip of water, every creak in the walls, felt like a threat. Kayla dozed off at some point, but I stayed awake, turning the badge over in my hands, remembering the early days of the zombie outbreak and the emergency alerts that turned our world upside down. Eventually, my exhaustion caught up with me. I closed my eyes, badge clutched tightly, and let the darkness of sleep take me. I awoke to Kayla gently shaking me. Her face was pale, eyes wide. "Listen," she whispered, pointing to the ceiling. From above, we heard what sounded like faint footsteps moving slowly across the floor of the fire station. It was impossible to tell if they were human or something else. The steps paused directly above our hatch, then continued farther away. We waited, hearts pounding, until all was quiet again. That morning we gathered what little courage we had. The generator was near dead, and the bunker was growing colder. We had to decide whether to stay or to try our luck above ground. The teenagers argued for leaving, and Kayla reluctantly agreed. She believed that help might come from outside the quarantine zone, or at least we could scavenge for better supplies. Part of me was terrified. What if the city above was nothing but rubble? What if more infected roamed the ruins, drawn by the slightest noise? Yet something in my gut told me the bunker was no longer safe. The scratches on the wall, the reappearance of my old badge, and Jonas's fate weighed heavily on my mind. Perhaps we had already stayed too long. We packed our belongings, distributing what little food we had left. Kayla checked the teenagers' health. They were rattled, but uninjured. At last, we approached the metal door that led up to the fire station. My hand trembled on the makeshift barricade. Outside lay a world we no longer recognized, possibly blanketed with the aftermath of an explosion. Yet inside, the shadows of what had happened below the hatch would remain with us forever. With a deep breath, we pushed the barricade aside. The door groaned open. Immediately, a cold draft swept in. No moans, no immediate sign of a horde. We motioned for the teenagers to follow, slowly ascending the stairs. The fire station corridors were dimly lit by pale, filtered daylight. Dust particles floated in the air, and the smell of charred wood drifted from somewhere outside. In the distance, I heard a faint siren wail, a reminder of the city's lost attempts at order. Kayla, the teenagers, and I paused at the door leading outside, glancing at each other. This was it, our step into whatever remained of the world post-Outbreak. And this is where I must leave my account unfinished. We made our choice that day, but I won't tell you how it ended, or what we found among the ruins. The only thing I can say for certain is that the bunker still exists beneath that old fire station, silent and brooding with memories that refuse to die. If you ever come across an emergency alert broadcast about a zombie outbreak and find yourself near that station, remember our story. Remember that even underground shelters built to protect can become prisons of fear if you lose your sense of humanity. I don't know if Jonas truly succumbed to the virus, or if something else roams those corridors, mimicking his form. I don't know if the bomb neutralized the infected, or merely scattered them. All I know is that sometimes the darkness below can be more haunting than anything you might face outside. Because down there, beneath the hatch, I left a piece of myself behind, along with unanswered questions that still echo in the corridors of my mind. Thank you for listening. If this story sent shivers down your spine, don't forget to like and subscribe for more unsettling creepypastas. Your support keeps this channel alive. Until next time, stay vigilant and remember, curiosity can be quite the companion, and sometimes a curse.